Hey everybody, it is May 21st. We're kind of doing a shorter little bit here because SpaceX's IPO has revealed some finances. Obviously, we're just coming off hot from the OpenAI versus Elon Musk trial. So just kind of a lot to dig into that we haven't had time to address, especially as it's topical. Maybe we should just start with the SpaceX filing because that's like the most recent part. Damon, how much have you gotten into the news there?
Yeah, so candidly, I haven't read the entire S1 yet. Just
Okay.
on my plate to do, but haven't gotten to walk through the entire thing. But I've seen kind of the high levels. I've seen, I guess, two things that kind of immediately jump out. Number one, as we were kind of passing back and forth, I think that it's very clear that Starlink is an incredible business, despite maybe some kind of cyclical downturns. I think the thing to open some questions around on Starlink is the depreciation schedule of the actual
Mm,
satellites. I think best estimates are roughly 5 years. But I actually candidly don't know how many of SpaceX's current satellite fleet is roughly on that 5 year age,
right.
cohort. Meaning, like, is that an estimate? Is that been realized? I don't really know. So that's like one thing. I mean, anytime you're dealing with a hardware business at this scale, those depreciation schedules become something that have to be managed because you got to relaunch satellites, right? So I think
Right.
that's like the open question on the Starlink front. Otherwise, it's an incredible business, right? And probably even despite
Mhm.
whatever that depreciation schedule is, it's an incredible business. I think the interesting thing is that is directly kind of counteracted by the drag down that is X, formerly Twitter, and the losses of XAI. Now,
Mhm.
I think the optimist or the bull would just simply say XAI's losses are to be expected. They're trying to become a frontier AI lab with the, whatever acquihire purchase acquisition of Cursor that seems to be impending. And also, they've just sold a large fraction of their Colossus One compute to Anthropic. So I think the bull would say that those solutions are being solved in real time, and it's perfectly okay if a frontier AI lab is not profitable. None of them are. Maybe Anthropic is, possibly, but that's because they have been historically slower to pay for compute, and XAI is vertically integrated, right? So I think bulls will
Right.
tell you that's an advantage. X is hard to wrap your head around, like where the advantage is. Hard to see that becoming truly profitable. That said, it's valuable in ways that are not as easily quantified. In my opinion, you can drive public perception. You own a marketing channel. You kind of get firsthand view of things that can benefit the business in other ways. Maybe it's an important data source for AI. Maybe becomes an incredible flywheel. Unsure. But that's kind of my high level digest. Starlink's incredible. We kind of already knew that.
Yeah.
XAI and X are the counteracting forces. You solve one of those, you probably have a rocket ship. Kind of pun intended there.
Uh,
If you don't,
eh.
maybe not.
Yeah, I haven't read like any of the actual documented stuff either. I've been reading his reports on top of that material. Um, it's fascinating to me, I think, recognizing like the movement to public is something that like Elon has like chastised before. But from what I've read and understood, um, his positioning, I guess, in the SpaceX IPO gives him some level of control over like what would regularly be like, hey, like every quarter you're kind of under pressure to report an earnings change in this variety. Um, while it seems that like he's not as subject to like stakeholder approval or like a board approval on behalf of stakeholders, for the purposes of like matching quarterly earnings expectations, that sort of thing. So my overall read is like Starlink, I think for the record, I love the product. Even when I was driving between Portland and SF, like I had a Starlink like plugged into the roof of my car, and had like perfect connectivity the whole time. Like was able to actually like work, like on the drive, which is highly unusual. Um, but I'm surprised, not surprised. Like I guess like when you digest it after the fact, like it's kind of obvious that that business is doing very, very well and like is like a very, very like it's a profit leader. Um, I think looking at the stat I saw is that last year the company lost 4.9 billion, I think, like or lost or spent. Whereas just in the past 3 months of this year, they're at 4.3 already, which I assume is mostly from the AI spend, like from the like especially adding X as a part of the business. Like that's just a major, major loss leader, which then connects into the whole Anthropic part of the dialogue of them offering compute space to Anthropic. That I'm just not really like, it's not clear to me what the, in a weird way, even though SpaceX is like from 2002, by Elon trying to wrap it as also a frontier lab now, it is unclear to me like what the winning strategy is of the AI slice of it. You know, like there's this, I think like a thesis being woven narratively by Elon that is like the orbital data centers will serve the AI, and that's why we're doing the space thing plus a frontier lab thing. But it's just like it's not cohesive, and he's ahead of it by making that happen before the IPO. Like it's not subject to the public's opinion in regards to how much money and capital I have at that point. But it's just not clear to me. Again, I say this being like fairly, like incredibly, incredibly bullish SpaceX. But it's just not clear to me like how that narrative ends up reconciling in the short to medium term, maybe even long term ish, if they're like selling compute, their AI strategies kind of like wavering, like they've never been the top of the game and they're deprecating models. And it's just not clear to me like where this like singular pitch unifies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, to address your first point first, Elon has baked in some kind of extreme governance protections for himself around the IPO that mitigate some of the typical pressures of being a public company. I think there is something to be said around if you really do anticipate OpenAI and Anthropic both going public this year, there's some value in getting out ahead of those simply because they'll soak up some of the oxygen or
like capital capture
exactly,
almost.
Exactly right. There's only so many dollars that can be spread in the public markets. Whoever goes out first will have access to all of it. The second has access to a portion of it. The third has access to a smaller portion of it, those kind of things. And we saw, I think it was yesterday, maybe the day before, there have been some leaks that OpenAI is going to file for an IPO in this fall, give or take, maybe fall of 2026. TBD on if that's actually going to happen or not, but that's at least the reports. So, yeah, interesting things there. I think a couple things. Number one, just as a thing that I think can't be unsaid, the TAM as cited in the S1 is beyond $28 trillion.
Yeah.
And the revenue multiple currently is like roughly 90x.
Yep.
So you're like a public company getting 100 times multiple on revenue, despite, having a negative earnings, is the world's largest Elon premium in a world in which Tesla has been trading, with the increased PE forever. So that's something that's certainly notable. It did to me, the bear bull case kind of breaks down pretty cleanly in that you either believe the AI story or you don't. If you don't believe the AI story, then this thing is basically Starlink and should be valued as such. If you do believe the AI story and you do believe data centers are going to be a thing, you do believe data centers in space is going to have to be a thing because we're going to either, number one, run out of capacity terrestrially, or number two, because you believe it's going to be so much of a political football that you actually can't get the things built, right? Either case votes well for data centers in space, maybe oceanic data centers as well, which is from some proposals I've seen. But in any event, SpaceX seems to have as much a lead there in anybody simply because they can actually launch things into space. So once somebody figures it out, they've got a first mover advantage there. So to me, bulls believe the AI story. They believe that either XAI itself can compete as a frontier lab, or that it can subsidize the compute clusters that it has to run inference and training and these other things for the research labs and for folks that are developing AI applications or otherwise. And if you don't believe that, then you're overpaying at the IPO. That's kind of the thing. Not for nothing, though, I will say, I do think you're going to get a lot of appetite in the early days of the IPO because unlike most IPOs, a lot of the index funds, the ETFs, et cetera, are going to be adopting SpaceX roughly 15 days after. I think it's 15 days. We can check me on that, but in some short amount of time afterwards. So there's a pretty good chance that sometime in the future, again, call it 15 days after the actual IPO, there's going to be a secondary bump as a bunch of people that have passive income or passive investments rather in these ETFs and, the Vanguards of the world, the kind of your 401ks, your retirement accounts, those kind of things. You're going to be passive buyers of SpaceX.
I'm just not educated. Why 15 days?
I don't know, honestly. I'm not sure if
Oh,
if that's a mandatory lockup period. That's very fast relative to most. Like most of the times, companies once they IPO, they have to be on the public markets for some amount of
right,
time before one of these indexes, one of these whatever they are, account managers. Again,
right.
I'm not exactly sure where this like pipeline of decision making actually flows through. I've just heard pundits kind of regurgitating this narrative that these folks are going to be kind of forced buyers of the SpaceX IPO, and therefore you would anticipate a bump around that inflection point. The thing I will say that's unique here is maybe not so much to do with SpaceX itself, but just more to do with the phenomena of private companies being private for longer, and
Mm,
therefore increased valuations when these things are
right,
becoming public companies. This is a public company who's going to, by all accounts, debut as $1 trillion plus in valuation.
right,
Right, that is
right,
previously unheard of in the
right.
literal sense. And so, like, we just now had $1 trillion companies in the last decade or whatever.
That's a good transition point to talk about Anthropic, OpenAI, obviously. So the stuff with, I mean, I'll start with Anthropic first because I think it's at least shorter to cover. Um, the reporting you sent, I didn't get a chance to even like look into it, but profitable? Question mark?
Yeah, I think so. Reports are possibly. Some
Okay,
of that has to do with revenue numbers that aren't coming in yet. And
okay,
the thing that's unclear to me is whether or not that counts for the transition of ramping in compute spend. Right.
hmm,
So setting the stage for those that haven't been following it as closely, Anthropic has been historically, and when I say historically, I mean over the last, call it 2 years, more conservative in their allocation of spending on forward-looking compute than other labs, right? Namely, XAI, who is vertically integrated and built their own, Colossus mega clusters, and then number two, OpenAI, who has spent kind of two astronomical amounts on compute because they just thought they were going to have it. They were serving consumer a wider audience
yeah,
base.
like traditional SF, like burn and turn kind of thing.
Exactly. And so Anthropic is in some ways playing catch up to that,
Hmm.
but they've seen such an incredible exponential growth in revenue. I just think that simply outpaced. Like they basically couldn't
I
spend money
see.
as fast as they were making it. And so what I think you'll see is probably a profitable quarter or two, and then it will dip back to
Mm,
non-profitability just because they will ramp up spending in compute. And again, I think
I see.
smartly. So I think we're kind of teeing up a debate for whether or not we all believe that is a good idea or not. But I think that's kind of the mechanism you're going to see play out. Right? They
Okay.
basically tripled, maybe even quadrupled, maybe even more, depending on what the final numbers are, revenue in like 3 months. And with that, when you're talking about that kind of growth at that kind of scale, right, meaning tens of billions of dollars reportedly, the spending just hasn't caught up to the revenue,
Right.
which is a good problem
I
to
see.
have.
Yeah. The Anthropic, like I guess like deal with SpaceX, I think was a strange event generally. Again, this is almost like week old news by this point that we're recording, but um Colossus was apparently at like I believe like 20% utilization or 30%
I had reports as
utilization
low
was
as
a report.
11. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So mind you, like Colossus is the cluster that like Tesla, as Damon mentioned, like vertically integrated support all their AI stuff. So that means it's also running like Tesla training runtimes. It's running Grok like inference, like all the anime waifus running on Twitter are theirs, whatever. But apparently they haven't been utilizing it intensely. They started selling that server space to Anthropic. So I mean, there's just such a competition for server demand. So there is kind of like this like handshake that I think makes a lot of sense for both companies. Like just like business wise, it's intelligent. It's somewhat of something of like an admission of like I think at least on Grok's end, it's a little bit of like a little bit of a white flag. Like it's a little bit of like we're folding a little bit of the idea of a consumer growth thing, recognizing the composer and the like cursor models are still coming to them hypothetically. But I found that a little bit unusual in the recent news cycle. We'll see what comes of that. I mean, otherwise it's just kind of like business as usual. Like it's not necessarily highly dramatic or inflammatory per se. Um, then we can talk about OpenAI. Case went out like a whimper. I was kind of disappointed it wasn't some grand closing, but it does sound like Elon's going to try to reopen the trial in some due amount of time. But for the most part, it just kind of felt like a lot of like airing out of dirty laundry from both sides that wasn't necessarily productive for either. I would kind of assume that Elon was kind of just hoping to get involved in like mucking up the waters a little bit for OpenAI IPOing hypothetically. like stall them, like put issues on their board alongside the big litany people and the public have against them, like the other lawsuits. But didn't really seem to stick the landing, I guess, in this specific instance.
Yeah, I think there's several layers, all of which are somewhat interrelated here. Number one, just commenting on the trial, it was basically thrown out due to a technicality, which I think to your point is like fairly anticlimactic, and there might be more to come on that. It felt a lot of like he said, and both sides just kind of one-upping each other with the amount of untrustworthiness of the other side. So I think that there's some sentiment that it will play out in public perception, but otherwise it's in somewhat of a nothing burger there. I think a critical view of this is the way that you framed it, which is internally XAI is looking at their model performance relative to others. They're saying Anthropic's clearly the best for coding, and that feels like the most important use case. Maybe OpenAI is a close second. Maybe at some point it's going to leapfrog, but in any event, we're not competitive, right? Even with the acquisition of Cursor, those are kind of dual waving white flags, in my opinion. Like we don't have the technical team internally to catch up, and we're certainly not there right now. That said, the compute they're licensing or selling, whatever, to Anthropic, as I understand it, is the Colossus 1, while they're doing most of their training on Colossus 2. So they're kind of selling, prior gen chips, most likely for inference, you would think, right? Because you kind of use a state of the art for training, and then inference kind of gets absorbed by everything else. Obviously, people can scale up and scale down. That's somewhat dynamic, but as a general rule, like you reserve the state-of-the-art GPUs for the state-of-the-art processes, which is training, not inference. And so they are kind of licensing or selling Colossus 1, so they do have excess compute. That 11% number, that 11 to 20% number that we're kind of throwing around with respect to the capacity that Colossus is running at, I think is twofold. Number one, it's just underutilization of the software. Many people aren't using it, so they just like have dormant GPUs. But then number two, I think it's just inefficient, meaning like data centers are hard. These mega clusters are really hard. It's really hard to network them. It's really hard to cool them. It's really hard to do all kinds of things. So I think there's probably also things that can be done on the literal physical infrastructure point that will also help improve the performance of those Colossus structures. I think it's also worth noting, just simply because it, in my opinion, can't be ignored. If you were acknowledging that you were behind and Elon has genuine beef with OpenAI, if you didn't want to see them win, it's in both XAI and Anthropic's best interest to kind of team up against the current market leader. And we certainly can argue whether OpenAI or Anthropic is the market leader right now. I think there's almost no argument that the momentum is all on Anthropic's side. Yeah. But in any event, both those folks are basically taking aim, reasonably so, at OpenAI. And so I think if you were just looking at this through like the most cynical lens, it would be Elon somewhat creating a partnership with the goal of having anybody besides OpenAI win, just simply out of spite as a result of the trial. Hard to know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I'm just like, I think anticipating the IPO probably like next month or something from SpaceX. It'll be pretty exciting, I think, to just watch the overall. I mean, it seems to me that like SpaceX rather, like will be the first ticker of a quote unquote AI lab on the public market, and they will get first sort of dibs from people. I am curious to watch. I think a lot of the dialogue around AI has been so flippant generally, like it's almost like cyclical between like, oh, like we're in a bubble, oh, we're up on this thing, like coding's doing all this. And without SpaceX necessarily being the quote unquote market leader in any of those spaces, not truly, but trying to frame themselves as an AI play, I think it'll make for a very, very entertaining summer of watching the stock bounce around according to the whim of the week, from public sentiment that just right now has been fairly immune. I mean, obviously, again, like Elon has decision-making power independent of the stock price, but at least as it's currently written, like I would imagine any one of these companies, if we're subject to public opinion to determine their valuation, would be very, very volatile quarter to quarter generally. And so it'll be exciting to see that science experiment kind of play out with actual dollars.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right, we're up there. Thank you all. We'll catch you all soon enough. Peace.